Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Morning Bible. It's wonderful to have you. It is, what day is it today for you? It's Saturday. Hopefully it's a glorious, lovely weekend where you are getting plenty of rest and plenty of sunshine and all the rest of it. We are in Luke once again, Luke chapter 13. Today's reading is going to be really short. It's just a short little passage, but it's really powerful, so hopefully short but sweet. So let's just jump into it. We are reading from verse 18 to 21 today. So it starts, "And Jesus said, therefore, what's the kingdom of God like? And to what shall I compare it? It is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his garden, and it grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air made nests in its branches. And he said again, to what shall I compare the kingdom of God? It is like the leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened." So, 2 really short little analogies for the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, I should say. And they're both quite humble little analogies. So to give you a little context as to why these would be so notable for the people hearing them, is throughout sort of Jewish history, they'd expected Jesus' coming. It had been prophesied a lot, but they'd expected it to be quite warlike. They'd sort of had visions of this warrior king who's going to ride in on like chariots with a whole army, who's going to overthrow the Roman Empire and establish the Jewish people as being in control. A lot of the Old Testament sees leaders like that. It sees a lot of military leaders, a lot of people who took land by power, who fought a lot of wars, and so they're very much expecting Jesus to continue in that, but be even bigger than that, an even stronger king than they'd ever seen before. And the kingdom of God that was going to be established, they'd expected it to be established like that. You know, it's this huge, like, boom, like, here's the kingdom of God, it's right here, everyone come to it. But Jesus's parables that he gives here are actually much, much more humble and much more simple. The first one is a mustard seed, a grain of mustard seed. For the people at the time, a mustard seed would have been the smallest seed they would have known of. It's tiny, 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 tiny. I'm trying to do it with my fingers. Like really, really small seeds. But they could grow into trees that were about like 12 feet tall. So very big tree considering it's going from a seed that big. And so Jesus is saying the kingdom of God is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his garden, and it grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air made nests in its branches. Initially I was trying to sort of read into what do the birds of the air making nests in this tree mean. I don't know, really. I don't know if it's entirely significant. It could just be there to sort of show us how big this tree's become, that it's gone from something that small to suddenly birds can make their homes in it once it's fully grown. Or it could be about people coming to the kingdom, people coming and making their homes in the kingdom. Don't really know, but essentially it's what we see is something very, very small being turned into something very big. And happening over quite a long period of time as well. It's quite a slow growth. So let's look at the second little comparison that he makes as well. He says, to what shall I compare the kingdom of God? It is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. So we've talked about leaven a few times before. It's always a weird word for me to say, leaven. But it's essentially yeast or a rising agent that they would put into their bread. Put into their food, and so there was leavened bread and unleavened bread, and unleavened bread was very flat, and leavened bread had a lot of air pockets in it and was quite full. You'd leave it to rise for a bit, leave it to prove. And so this woman took some leaven and hid it in 3 measures of flour. So I didn't really know what 3 measures of flour was. I assumed it was like 3 cups of flour, like we do today, but I was very off base there. 3 measures of flour is enough flour to make bread for 100 people. So it's a lot of flour. It's more than just flour, we'd suppose as well, because leaven's being added to it. So it's kind of a dough, and it's a dough big enough for 100 people to eat from it. But she hides leaven in it. That shows how small this leaven is, that it hides in that dough, you don't even see it. So she hides a bit of leaven in it, and that dough just it sort of expands and balloons, and something very small makes a huge impact and creates something massive. And so the thing that people all agree on with this passage is that Jesus is saying, look, the kingdom of God isn't this huge, like, boom, here it is kind of thing, at least not at this point in time when Jesus was coming. He's saying, look, the arrival of the kingdom of God looks like me. It looks like something quite small, something fairly insignificant. Not insignificant in the sense that Jesus was insignificant, but in the sense that he was a man. He was just a guy walking around. He didn't have all these armies. He didn't have all these riches. He didn't have anything like that. He was just the son of a carpenter walking around and talking to people. And so that's sort of, Jesus is saying, look, I'm, in the world's eyes, I'm this mustard seed, but in God's eyes, I'm this tree, right? In the world's eyes, I'm this tiny bit of leaven hidden in this bread, but in God's eyes, I'm this huge risen dough that's going to feed 100 people. And he's saying essentially that's what the kingdom of God is. The kingdom of God is something that's small, but grows into something big. The thing that people are in, I don't want to say disagree on, but there's more contention and more discussion around, is whether this passage is conveying that the kingdom of God grows slowly. Obviously a mustard seed will take a while to turn into a tree, and dough will take a while to rise once you put the leaven in it, once you put the rising agent into it. And so there's definitely a discussion to be had about whether Jesus is also saying the kingdom of God needs time, it grows over time, and builds. Some people think this is the case, some people think this isn't the case, so I'll leave you to sort of do your own readings and make your own minds up about that. Because you can see the argument on both sides. So on the one hand, you wouldn't want to say that God only gives us a little bit of the kingdom and then sort of grows the kingdom, but then at the same time there's a lot of passages in the Bible that's talking about building your kingdom, and building implies growth. So I kind of leaned more towards the idea that the kingdom is growing. And actually, in the grand scheme of all time, a mustard seed growing into a tree doesn't actually take too long when you consider how many years, the earth has been here. That's today's passage. Nice and short, nice and sweet. Just a little reminder of sort of what God's kingdom looks like, and actually sometimes how things that seem quite small and insignificant can actually have huge impacts. And it's often the small things that God uses for his goodness and uses for his kingdom. I hope you all have a good weekend. I hope you have a good day tomorrow, and I will see you all on Monday. Much love. Bye.